overthrew Assad have promised a new government overseen by a leader with a proper chin and mustache, and assure you that this new person isn't just Zelensky's new character. With the world in turmoil, Joe Biden returns with these encouraging words. I still know how to mumble. I mumble good. And moves on to receive the first ever presidential retirement blankie. Next, the ugliest person on earth makes health recommendations. And with red dye being banned, some moms are concerned as to how their children will meet their daily petroleum needs. But good news for our viewers is our chef here teaches you at-home recipes to turn foods poisonous red. Are your kids sitting starving at home, refusing to eat because things are no longer flavored delicious red? The days of bright red packaging that your kids loved with the fine red 40 that we're eating for years in America has been banned. And I know your kids are sitting at home refusing to eat. You present them delicious foods such as this chocolate chip muffin, but they won't eat it. But that's why we've invented the all-natural beet-pressed red, along with some other undisclosed chemicals that will turn any of your household foods now that delicious red color that your kids so desperately love. So here we go. You take this original muffin, now red. Frosted Flakes. Your kids will no longer eat this. But we add our all-red chemical, and look at that. Now you've got that fine red color that your kids love. Or take even Fluff. A classic, a camping classic. Your kids want s'mores, and they're not just going to eat congealed sugar if it doesn't have the fine red coloring. And that's why we come in with the beet-pressed red. We add it, and now look at that red goodness for your kids. It's your daily dose of misinformation, pulled from a lightly hemorrhoided asshole. It's today's Run Your Mouth!
Listen to them unless you think it's true. Follow your heart and your dreams. Follow your heart and your dreams. Woo!
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Run Your Mouth podcast. I forgot to turn off the overhead lights, which is why this looks like we're in the Blair Witch Project. I was going to say that we finally got the big budget. We're out. We're going to go explore this McDonald's. We're doing real investigative journalism, but Run Your Mouth. What are you going to do? You forgot to turn off the overheads, and now it looks like we're in the Blair Witch Project of this, or like I stole someone's Ring camera. That's what that looks like. This looks like I got out there. I convinced my mom that I was going to go film a news show, and she wouldn't give me the budget for cameras, so I took her Ring camera, and now we're here. But anyways, firstly, I did want to give respect to some good burns. Some good burns coming in the chat, starting with Rachel Sly saying, LOL, Robbie's entire pantry laid out on the table. Not bad. And then we've got Bro Hicka, no way am I eating regular uncolored muffins. Anyways, everybody, I got new shows coming up. I just told you about them if you were watching the intro. We've got Jersey next week on Thursday. Got a bunch of comics on that. Going to be doing stand-up. All the comics are doing stand-up, and then we're going to do some mashup on some news topics, take some things from the audience, mix it up. It's going to be a good time. And then that Saturday, I will be in San Antonio, Texas, with a bunch of really funny people living out in Austin. Links are in the episode description. All right, let's get into the episode because I got a bunch of things I'd like to cover. And then we've got Kyle Asnon coming on to give us the entire scoop on the Syria situation. So, we're actually going to get into it. It's not just going to be a whole bunch of horse shit of me meandering about nothing. But before we bring on Kyle, we will have a half hour of meandering about absolutely nothing. And firstly, I would like to scold this country, and I would like to take a firm stance on that we all need to start having better taste in men. I mean, I get it. This kid's got nice abs. He's got a downward angled shot that makes you want to come on him. I understand where people are coming from. But, I mean, really, are we going to all get all obsessed with this fruitcake who may or may not have a unibrow? Is this really the type of taste in men that we're going to put forward as being the lover boy? Why is it that when men go out and kill people, women get so excited? Women love serial killers. That's why, you know what? That's what's really going on. Every time, like, you're trying to meet up with someone, they're like, hey, you're not going to kill me. They secretly, for some reason, want you to want to kill them. It's because women want you to be that obsessed about them that they think you're going to end their life. Like, even if you don't know them and you're first meeting them, they want you to be that level obsessed with them that it's like the end of the relationship and you caught them cheating on you and now you want to kill them. That's the type of passion that women are looking for. And that's the reason that for some reason they're all completely obsessed with serial killers. And then you know what else it is? I think it's like this obsession of my vagina could have saved him. Look at that handsome man. Can you believe that he went out and committed these crimes before I gave him my vagina to see if that would be the thing that converted him to still remaining a normal person? But here you got it. You got this shooter. They apparently caught him. And I'll just throw out some of the things that make me go, something about this seems real fishy. Now listen, this is a big old planet Earth. There's a lot of people living on this planet Earth, and there's going to be a lot of things that happen that since I like this quote. Sometimes I like to quote it. That's what you do with quotes. Chaos is just the emergence of new patterns not yet readily understood. It's an argument against tradition, and it's an argument against people getting all panicked anytime new things start to happen. And so listen, we live in a big planet. There's a lot of people living on this earth, and you might get some weird incidences of kids with amazing abs that seem to like eating at McDonald's, pulling off great crimes, sneaking away from the crime scenes, then ending up in Pennsylvania just sitting at a McDonald's, which is that part of his ab-eating regimen, that he eats the McDonald's and then he gets such violent diarrhea that he continues to have the abs? There was one time in my life I cut down to 155, and you know why I was able to do that? Because I was unemployed. You know how easy it is to be in shape when you're unemployed, when you're not just leaving an office all angry and go and eat cookies and being like, I don't want to go out and party. I gotta refuel my spirit. You know, it's very easy. If you got a friend who's in great shape, he's probably unemployed, or he hit the level of wealth that, you know, someone's just preparing his meals. He's got a personal trainer. He can afford the testosterone shots. Everyone else is fat and disgusting looking, or mediocre in shape, or has some muscle and tits. You know, that's the world that we live in. So okay, anyways, I'm meandering. So I'm asking about this kid. Oh yeah, when I was 155, man, I was eating clean. And then I remember the couple times that I didn't eat clean, I was like, I gotta cross-train on eating fun foods, because then you go out with friends and they're eating some Hot Poppers, and you think I have a bad stomach now. When I was eating clean at 155, if you threw something that the stomach wasn't used to into the mix, that was like throwing a match on some kerosene. You gotta eat not clean on a regular basis if you want to go out with your friends for hot wings and beers without violent stomach eruptions. So maybe that's what maybe this was his McDonald's day and his ab regimen, where he eats clean all the time. And at the moment, he's estranged from his parents, so he can't afford going for juice cleanses or colon cleanses. And so it was the McDonald's day where he was just going to eat some disgusting, greasy McDonald's food, defile the bathroom, and really get, you know, the lines in the abs. Maybe that's what was going on here. But that's just the first thing I'm calling bullshit on, is you're telling me that this pretty boy is eating at McDonald's? Or maybe that's just what it is to be 23, 24. I don't know what his age is. All right, next is, so this kid is super slick. Super slick, doesn't want to get caught, wants to get out of New York City. Maybe he just wanted to make the storyline more interesting. Maybe he realized that with this election coming up, with Biden, you know, just Biden's not fun anymore. He just reappears and mumbles. You know, we're in this transitionary phase, and he realized, you know what, let me give a little bit of excitement. Let's give him a little bit of a chase. And then after 3 days of getting out there, being on the run, he decided, you know what, why don't I just go sit down in a McDonald's with all of the evidence on me? Let me just sit down with a Wile E. Coyote sign that says, hey, please catch me, I am right here. And then also the weird hippie commune story of just going to Hawaii and hanging out with some serial killers for a little while. So, listen, I'm just saying, all of this could be exactly what happened. It's a big planet. There's some weird people out there. You're going to have some pretty boys with nice abs that every once in a while go postal and want to kill people. But as to how this story is coming together, rather strange. So continuing with the new details emerging from this story. First is, accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione allegedly laid out his murder plot in a handwritten notebook, because that's what you do when you escape a crime scene and you don't want to get caught. You keep all the details in your notebook, complete with the to-do list of tasks needed to carry out the slaying, police sources told the Post. Look, we found him with his manuscript. Next, we've got from the New York Times, Eyes, Not Tech, led police to suspect in CEO killing. The key was not advanced facial recognition technology, and I'm calling bullshit on this one too. But you know what? I think that they've got our faces, they've got all of our information on computers, they know where we are at all times, and if they really want to find you, they'll find you. You want to go murder someone in the middle of Chicago, they don't really give a shit. They're not going to find you. They got to keep the illusions going of that they don't just know what we're doing all of the time. But my guess is, especially when you see a headline that specifically says, yeah, we didn't use any software on this one. No, it was just good old honest police work. Hey, you ever interact with the cops after a crime? Is their police work usually this good? It's like the January 6th thing when they started going through Facebook with all the facial recognition stuff. No, it was just good old honest police work. Us knocking on doors and beating up some suspects. It was us taking some perps into a room and beating them up and getting the information the old-fashioned way. If they did actually catch the right guy, I'm going to guess that all they didn't even need those pictures when he removed his mask. They're running facial recognition software all the time. They've been scanning our eyeballs at the airport. They know where you are. They know who you are. There's no getting onto even a bus. Even if you want to take the most undignified way of travel on a bus, they got cameras in those stations. They know when you got on the bus, you want to take the highways. Well, they got a picture of your license plate every time you go through a toll booth. You're probably attached to an Easy Pass. I don't think you're going anywhere, anytime without them knowing who you are and what you're doing. And of course, they don't actually look at that file of information unless you kill a CEO and everybody's interested in it and they need to retain law and order and make it seem like we can't just be out assassinating the elites. But there you have it. They caught the guy. They're claiming that it was just off the backs of good old honest police work. And now you got other people. You got your spoofs. You got your Twitter people. And the Twitter people, they can be pretty good. There was that story, I've heard Dave Smith talk about it, about that dude who was torturing cats. And then the internet, the investigators of the internet were able to track him down, I think, off the style of the outlets. And they worked from there. And so the people of the internet, they're looking at the eyebrows and they're going, I don't understand. These eyebrows don't match up. And let's say that this isn't the right guy. So then what is it? The internet, the government just has a file of random schmucks. So some crime gets committed and they just start doing some work. And they're like, all right, who's read Ted Kaczynski? Who's posted things about healthcare? And they find an online profile. And then they go, all right, this schmuck's eating at McDonald's. Let's go pick him up. The face is close enough and we'll throw these things into his backpack. Is it that good of a frame job that they literally just have a file of random fall guys? And, they started sitting around at the CIA and they're like, we're going to need a fall guy on this one. And they're like, we got this guy who stopped talking to his family. He spent a little bit of time down in Hawaii. His facial profile seems similar enough. And we could just throw this shit into his backpack. All right, let's take a couple of comments before we get into the ghost gun part of it. Rachel Sly, who the fuck could identify based off that pic? That whole thing is super sus. John Popick, you mean to tell me you don't travel with all your IDs and your manifesto with you at all times? Not typically. And you know what? If you're not committing crimes, I think you certainly don't want to... Guys, quit just casually traveling with your manifestos. I know sometimes it's fun, to roam through towns and pretend like you're a serial killer to see if you can get some women attracted, where you go to a bar and some lady's like, oh, what are you up to? I'm a writer. What are you writing? Oh, it's just my newest manifesto. I don't know if I'm going to go through with any of the crimes, but I just like having the manifesto because maybe one day I'll get the inspiration. Good point, John Popick. Unless the guy wanted to get caught, but with that said, I don't understand, why not just getting caught day of? Why get caught 3 days later? And if you do just want to get caught eating somewhere, why not somewhere classier than McDonald's? Was this entire incident just brought to you by McDonald's? Ray, did they use remote viewing? I don't know what that means. Jeff Gordon's mom. I was surprised McDonald's worker had the wherewithal to see something and say something. That's another suspicious point about this. that the people at McDonald's working there were that much in the loop and they weren't that overworked that they were able to take the time and call it in. Also, you know what? I hadn't realized that one, but that one is suspect as well. Patsy left for the day. He got the chloroform and some taters. Jeff Gordon's mom, no way Jose in the chat, shout out. What's up, Jose? What's up with people, LOL. Jose's got good conspiracies. You got anything for me on this one? And then Rachel Sly saying, normalize carrying guns and manifestos. All right, so then the next interesting aspect was at first people were going, look at this gun that the guy was using, which was a strange gun because to have to, I'm not a great shot. I don't know guns that well. But, you know, I would think if I was trying to have a gun, I wouldn't want one with like a manual slide. The whole thing seemed like not the easiest gun to be using. And then people said that that is a gun that really only exists if you want to assassinate somebody. That is what that gun is for. And I guess the reason why that one, I'm not the gun control guy. I think you should be able to go buy guns, enjoy guns. I guess that's for rare collectors, people with a lot of money that want to say, hey, I've got the Hitman gun here because it's fun to own. But then, now the story is apparently he 3D printed the super gun. And then, if the guy 3D printed the super gun, is this going to be some sort of a platform for why they say that we can't have 3D printers? Or is this when they finally admit that there's no point in even having gun control? Because they're like, even if we're going to do all this shit, apparently you can just get the diagrams for how to print super assassin weapons right off the internet. All right, and then here was the next one in this story, is that we've got, oh, guys, this is why it's nice to have money, is because even in situations like this is when you can afford the good attorneys, which apparently the guy had the manifesto. In one article, I was reading what even sounded like an admission, but maybe it wasn't an admission. It was some sort of a statement about the good people at the FBI and law enforcement or whatever. But even so, if you got enough money, you'll get a lawyer who will show up. Man's your own attorney. I haven't seen any evidence. Good for you, lawyer guy. Here we go. I don't even know if this is him or whatever Dickie said, so we're going to test those waters and give the government a chance to bring some evidence forward. I like that. The lawyer's nice enough where he's going to give the government a chance to come forward and bring some evidence. And then you got this weird storyline about him hanging out down in Hawaii. People who knew Mangione in Hawaii, where he lived recently, said he suffered debilitating back pain and had recently undergone surgery. He fell out of contact with friends and family about 6 months ago. And that's why for you guys, the fans of the Run Your Mouth podcast, I've put together this because, you know, we live in a new world now where if you're suffering from back pain, you might have been chipped by the government with something that's going to get you to go kill other people. And so I have this warning for all of the fans so that you guys don't end up in this situation. Let's roll the clip. Ever heard of? Do you then find yourself having to research to see who the person is? How do you find them? The details of his life. You have back pain and now have concerns that there might be chips inside your body. Do you suddenly find yourself going, my back hurts, followed by a thought of killing specific targets you've never heard of? Do you then find yourself having to research to see who the person is? How do you find them? The details of his life as you stalk your prey. Do you awake from your slumber after sleepwalking where you find yourself going, kill, 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 and then getting visions in your sleep of designs for ghost guns? Well, then come to our Chips Palace, where we can help reprogram the government chips for happier thoughts.
I like ponies now!
There you go, everybody. If you needed something else to be concerned with in your life, it's that perhaps your back pain is actually a government chip that's going to feed you thoughts that you should be going and murdering other individuals. Someone had this point, and I appreciate this one. No chance you're that jacked with a debilitating back injury. That is a good point. All right, and then adding to the suspiciousness of all this, you want to talk about serial killer vibes. You want to talk about the kind of person that when they talk, you're just like, are you running a cult? Are you bringing people down to Hawaii, telling them that you got a good spot for co-working and then brainwashing them? So let's give this a watch. It's the person that I guess runs the place where this guy was living when he was down in Hawaii. If you haven't seen this already and your antennas for, hey, something fucking weird here is going on, weren't already up, let's give this one a watch. and you guys can let me know if we have sound, which we should.
Looking forward to living in Hawaii and being healthy. He was excited about getting new people, experiencing new culture.
And did he, all right, so I know this was back in around 2022, so you're coming out of COVID. I'm curious, RJ, did you know where he was working remotely or why he had suddenly decided to decamp to Honolulu? Was there sort of any break in his life or anything that you ever became aware of?
No. It's very natural. Our members all have remote jobs, and Hawaii is one of those places that many people would love to live. So we provide kind of an all-inclusive living experience.
You also just got to love a guy who sees a situation like this and goes, oh, this is a perfect opportunity for me to pitch my business. I mean, listen, if this guy is not some CIA kook who brings people down to Hawaii and then converts them into trained assassins to take out CEOs for probably political reasons or, you know, for stock option reasons. I can't tell you specifically why he did it. Well, then God bless the inner capitalist of this individual, of him going, you know what? This is my opportunity to get on the news and pitch my business model. Jose Gallison coming back in and saying, supposedly dude couldn't bang, but I call shenanigans. Dudes will find a way, and he definitely seemed healthy enough to figure it out. I mean, that's like the old, like, Hitler only has one testicle. What kind of evidence could we possibly have to say that this guy couldn't bust nuts? Is that going to be the next thing in this interview with this pretty boy from Hawaii? Was he seemed like a regular guy until one day we did our jerk off in the sun circle, and it turned out that he just kept going, and everyone else came 3-4 times. We held hands, we bathed in the sun, but this guy just couldn't bust any nuts. And that's when we realized he was a danger to have amongst our community. And so we sent him back to America, unable to bust nuts. And we all know what happens when a man can't bust nuts. So, you know what? If anything, if that is true, instead of getting rid of 3D gun printers, we just have to put down the men who can no longer bust nuts because they're the real danger to society. All right, let's continue listening to, the dudes with necklaces, fresh cut. Tell me this isn't Fed-faced right here. Let's continue.
So it makes it easy for them to move to the islands.
Okay, so I know you considered him, from your interactions with him, the time you spent together, as someone who would be a lifelong friend.
I'm sorry, as much as I would like to roll this clip, we have further breaking news on this ongoing storyline that apparently the guy couldn't bust nuts. And supposedly, I saw people online saying he couldn't bone anymore because of his back, only compelling. And, I mean, come on. That's got to be the biggest horse shit I've ever heard. You're telling me that this guy's back hurts so his back hurts so much that he could still exercise, he could still have shredded abs, he could still move around, he could still handle a firearm, but he can't bust a nut because that's when he feels it in his back? I mean, dudes with back pain, the only thing that they're doing is laying at home and jerking off because that's all you can do. There's no way that this guy's back pain was so bad that he couldn't bust a nut. That does not make sense. You're telling me, so does it hurt if a lady's on top? You can't even get his dick sucked? That's how much his back hurts? I don't buy it. All right, let's continue with a little bit more of this interview. But if you guys have more breaking news about how this guy can't bust nuts, I will pause this video on a dime.
What was he like when you knew him? And I know you've shared some pictures with us as well. I mean, in terms of how social he was and the sort of interactions that he would have had with the other people in your co-living community.
He was a very thoughtful person, communicated really well, was friendly, had good relationships with everyone. He was even, in some ways, a bit of a leader. He helped spearhead a book club that we started just so we could, keep those intellectual pursuits alive from back when we were in school.
So you mentioned that he was into health. How did that manifest himself? And you mentioned you went hiking together, things like that. Can you tell us more about that? Why he cared about health? And I understand also that at one point you did become aware of some issues with his.
All right, further breaking news on this individual's inability to bust nuts. We've got the Doodler coming in saying back issues can cause nerve damage resulting in a limp dick. I mean, that's got to suck. First, you start off with back pain, and then you find out that... But listen, I've done enough Adderall in my life to tell you that even with a limp dick, you can get a load out of a limp dick. Sometimes the loads you get out of a limp dick are the most meaningful loads. Jose Gallison, can you get my back on this one?
Other men in the chat, can you get my back on this one? Sometimes, like, you've busted like 3 nuts in a day, but you decide this is champion day. We're training, and I'm going to go for a 4th nut. And your body, it really doesn't have that 4th nut. And you got to work for it, and you've got to get it out of what's not really a very stiff erection. You can still bust a load out of a limp dick. So I'm calling bullshit on that one also. More comments. Evil Fandango. I think that whatever podcast had a woman on who dated Luigi, and unlike this dude who came on to pitch his business, came on to go, well, his problem was that faggot had a limp dick. Way to kick at a man when he's down is to, you know what she was really reporting was, my boyfriend was gay. That's what that lady was really reporting. If the lady decided to take the opportunity, and by the way, excuse my language, I try not to use words like that. I was calling him that word because he engaged in violence, which is queefy. So this guy's girlfriend went onto a podcast to say, hey, that guy can't bust nuts. I think he just didn't like her. All right, let's take a couple more comments and move on to our next topic, because there were a few other things that I wanted to get into before I bring on Kyle. We've got Jay Maupin saying all the women in the chat, and Rachel saying maybe Robbie should host a show on how to nut with various injuries. You know, that could be what my next career move. There's too many other people that have created Run Your Mouth podcasts. I don't understand why. I was clearly first. But now you go try and find the Run Your Mouth podcast, you get these runners, you get all these people with this name, and they're not going to stick around, and they're clouding the environment. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there that are talking politics, but maybe my true expertise can be in teaching people how to get through their penile injuries and still extract cum from their bodies. My true passion. All right, next topic. Let's move on from this nonsense. It's enough of all the cum talk. We can do a classier show than that. I blame Jose. Usually we're not that cum oriented on the Run Your Mouth podcast, but he brought that gay towering gang energy here. All right, next topic. FBI investigates mysterious drones filling night sky in New Jersey that have unnerved residents. Guys, have we become this docile since COVID that there are random drones in the sky and people aren't just walking outside Yosemite salmoning these things? And fine, maybe you want to tell me that we shouldn't just have bullets going up in the air because they could come back down and fall on people's heads. So we can't get a reality TV show going with some of these SEAL Team 6 people getting out there, calling them the drone hunters and putting them out there and shooting down some drones. How much of a distraction do we need that they can't even put up another Chinese spy balloon to float around and then pretend like for some reason there's international hazards of shooting the thing down? Let's let it float through the whole country and then let it magically fall down while it's in the ocean. You're telling me that people in New Jersey just have to look up in the skies and see things that are floating around? No one knows what it is. No one wants to claim responsibility, and we can't just shoot the things down? What's your guys' conspiracy theory on these random drones? They trying to get us used to seeing things in the sky so that they can start projecting the images of aliens and telling us that we got to go back indoors, and that as long as Kamala Harris is president and not Donald Trump, the aliens will leave? Hey, as long as you don't investigate the Biden crime family, these aliens said that they'll go back to space. What is going on with this drone story? Why do we gotta when do we become such fucking pussies? All this talk about having a strong military and we gotta be out there and we gotta be showing Russia a lesson, because if Russia doesn't learn a lesson, they're gonna go and they're gonna take over all of Europe. We've got to keep Putin in check. And we got to keep Putin in check, because if we don't keep Putin in check, China, they're gonna go out and they're gonna take Taiwan. And then all of a sudden, we get drones that are just floating around in the sky, and the government's gonna turn around and go, we don't know what those are, but nobody should touch them. I mean, this is American airspace. And if there's unknown objects that are just floating around in American airspace, we need all of you to look up there and just know that we can't protect you, and that those things need to continue to just be in the sky. What are they going to start? How soon do they start selling me on that these are Iranian drones? And that's why we need to go to war with Iran, because Iran has drones in our airspace, and they are the threat to America, unlike any other threat we've ever seen in America before. Who knows? Maybe that even happened in the news today. I was busy putting together those stupid clips for the show. All right, let's see what we got in the chat. What do you guys think are these drones? We've got Obsy going Project Bluebeam. I'm not familiar with that. We've got Janker saying net gun. Yeah, how has not one person just gone outside with a slingshot or something and then gone on the news and been like, hey, I got one of these drones. Robbie, don't you know to use your back muscles when you nut? I don't know. I'll take your class on how to nut. Maybe I'm not putting enough back into it, which is why I don't get enough of an arc going. I'll take your classes. Jose Gallison. Don't know what the angle is, but feels like an op. Majority of these drones are clearly planes or helicopters. It's probably just some idiot. And then Ixo, I saw big orbs appear and fly around giant towers 400 yards off the highway in 1997. And that's why you're in the chat of the Run Your Mouth podcast. All right, and then last topic, and then hopefully we've got Kyle hopping on so that we can get into all of the Syria situation. We can actually get ourselves some education about what is going on over there. But I guess the New York Times is running out of things for criticizing Donald Trump about, and so now their most recent thing is just all the shit that he's selling. But I like the idea of Donald Trump presidency round 2, where it just kind of turns into the Truman Show, where every single time he uses something, you get the pitch of, and you can buy that on my website. It's for sale. You can totally buy it. And then last topic, and then hopefully Kyle hops on. We're now getting into the story of how much money the government spends. Elon Musk is promising to clean it up. Vivek Ramaswamy promising to clean it up. And Rand Paul, he sometimes comes through with some incredible stories of what government is spending its money on. And this one is particularly hilarious. If you want to talk about what would make for a great Hollywood movie, it's people in the government who have positions that are not at the CIA and then never report to work and get great paychecks because they claim that they've actually been placed in this agency by the CIA. And so don't ask me what I'm up to. This job is just cover. Can you imagine pulling that off at your office? You're like, I know that my paycheck comes from here, but I'm actually undercover from the police department. So I'm going to go run my investigations, but you guys have to continue to pay me for this job that I'm not doing. And don't worry about getting reimbursed from that other department because it's top secret. And so you guys are going to have to pay me on this one. But this was, I believe it was a Zero Hedge article. Laura Ingraham, I know you have been constantly focused on this, and you have been with Vivek this week. Here, let's go full screen so I can better read it. Okay. Laura Ingraham, I know you have been constantly focused on this, and you have been with Vivek this week. What ideas have you given him because he's looking to you for ideas other than, of course, as we're saying, getting the federal workers? Senator Rand Paul, one of my favorite examples of federal workers not showing up is from a few years ago. We had an assistant to the head of the EPA, and he told us his boss that he also worked for the CIA. He said he would be gone for 6 months at a time. Finally, during a government shutdown, someone said, hey, Mr. Smith, we understand this guy works for you. We haven't seen him in 6 months. They replied, who? They had never heard of the guy. The man completely made up a story about working for the CIA, and for nearly a decade, millions of dollars were paid to him while he didn't show up. He'd be lounging around saying, I'm on a secret mission to the Middle East, can't talk. That kind of stuff runs rampant through the government, which, sometimes you got to be mad at people for the money that they're stealing from us. And other times you just got to be like, dude, can I just hold your balls and maybe absorb some of your energy? Like, no homo. Can I just hold your balls and absorb a little bit of your ability to spew absolutely horseshit? Can you imagine just reporting to your boss, hey, I work at the CIA, no questions asked, send me my paycheck, I'm on a secret mission, and your boss to so not give a shit because I guess there's just an endless spigot of government cash to just go, all right. Hey, do I have to fill out any paperwork to oversee you taking this $1 million paycheck and whether or not you're actually running a mission or not? All right. Bolzari Normus, LOL, I love that guy. John Popick, respect the hustle. That dude deserves all the money that he stole. Yeah, I feel like amnesty for people with good enough stories. If Doge ends up rounding up the people who have it should be like that movie Catch Me If You Can. I guess give those guys new jobs catching the other people who are just bullshitting, and then understand that we're probably going to continue to pay these people paychecks. But like at some point, you got to respect that Michael Jordan was the best to ever play basketball. I'd like to know who is the best at fleecing the government, having a job, and not even showing up to, like, I once had an internship at a hedge fund one time. It was in college, and they did not really have work for me to do. But you know what I did? I showed up every day and I sat at a computer and I pretend like I was working. And it was a hedge fund startup. And apparently, some of the other people who worked at this hedge fund did not get the memo that if you're actually getting paid, you got to pretend like there's a job for you to do. Because it was a startup and they didn't quite have clients yet. They didn't have like work for the accountant guy. And so the accountant guy, he just didn't show up every day. And you know what he let the bosses know? Hey, we don't need a full-time accountant here. And so they fired him. And there was another guy. He was supposed to be the guy on the phone with clients. There weren't really clients yet. And so he stopped showing up because he didn't need to be there. And they're like, oh, I guess we don't need the full-time guy. So if there's one tip for all you kids out there, if you're working from at home, then, everyone knows that you're not really working. They don't expect you to do anything. But if we end up back in a culture where you've got to show up to an office, and everyone kind of always resents the guy, the first one in and the last one out. And that guy, he's usually not more productive. But everyone just likes it because part of the game of being in an office is that your boss feels good that he's paying someone who's just going to be there, who's going to man his post, and he's going to be on the clock. And so as a word for the wise, if you've got an office that you have to report into and there's not enough work for you to do while you're there, you just show up and pretend like there is. But then you got to respect these people who not only don't show up, don't even pretend like they're working from home. I want to hear what were some of the ballsiest stories. I'm actually on the UFO hunting team, and that's why they assigned me to this local job at the law clerk's office, because that's the best cover for the people investigating the aliens. All right, and then a quick plug from our sponsor, sheathunderwear.com. If you're out there and you're concerned about these drones in the skies, you think in the middle of the night you might have to take off and start running, because obviously if there were aliens coming, they'd want New Jersey first. We all know that. So if you're a resident of the state of New Jersey and you're concerned that the aliens are invading and that in the middle of your sleep you might have to take off, you're not going to want to be in loose Fruit of the Looms underwears. You're not going to want to be in those old, raggedy, sleeping pants that can get tripped up on the ankles. You're going to be wanting sheathunderwear.com, the most comfortable underwear that's ever graced the balls of man. If you use promo code RYM, you're going to get yourself 20% off the greatest underwear that's ever graced the balls of man. And now it's enough of my stupid horseshit. We have some actual information coming at you. Mr. Kyle, thank you so much for joining the Run Your Mouth podcast.
Robbie, thanks for having me.
All right, so the Syria situation is well beyond my knowledge. I look at it and I'm like, the CIA did something here, but I don't actually know what happened. And so I figured maybe we could get into some of the details, get a little bit of the education. So just to start off, can you tell us a little about this new guy who's leading the operation, what exactly his role in Al-Qaeda was, or his little affiliate group, and how directly his relationship with the U.S. actually is? Give me the scoop here. Let's start with who the guy even is.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about al-Jolani, who apparently is changing his name again, and I'm sure this is to obscure his history. But he is, so in, after 9/11, the attacks happened, and this guy, is actually motivated by the attacks and the death of 3,000 American citizens to go and fight on behalf of Al-Qaeda, right? Like that is actually his cause for going and joining up with Al-Qaeda in Iraq, where he ends up fighting against U.S. troops for, nearly a decade during the U.S. occupation. But when 2010 comes around, by then he's made a deal with the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and also with Baghdadi, who goes on to become the leader of ISIS, to start an Al-Qaeda affiliate group in Syria called the Al-Nusra Front. And so that's from, I think, the late 20s until 2016, he heads a group called the Al-Nusra Front that operates in Syria, and its goal is to overthrow Damascus. Now, at the time, there's a split between ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria over like ideological differences between Jolani and Baghdadi, but those have to do like when to declare an Islamic caliphate. And so Jolani believed in playing the long game and taking Damascus, where Baghdadi believed that he was going to declare himself the caliph and, create an Islamic caliphate that spanned the Iraq and the Syrian border. And so because of those tactical differences, not necessarily, philosophical differences, they're both jihadists. They both believe in conducting attacks outside of Syria against Western targets. We saw a lot of those from the Islamic State. And during this time, the State Department acknowledged that the area of Syria that Jolani controlled, which was the Idlib province of Syria, was the largest al-Qaeda safe haven on the planet. And so when 2016 rolls around, he decides, and he does this in coordination with the Islamic State leadership, that he would go ahead and rebrand his group from the al-Nusra Front and officially break ties with al-Qaeda. Again, he does this in coordination with the al-Qaeda, the international al-Qaeda leadership based in Pakistan, but still he breaks those ties. Now, why does he do that? Because from rebrand? For a rebrand, but also I guess I just want to point out the importance here, Robbie, where from 2010 until 2016, Obama's in office and the CIA is running their program Timber Sycamore, where they're funneling jihadists first from Libya and their weapons into Syria, and then also just, helping the Turks and the Saudis funnel weapons to the jihadist opposition to Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Well, as time goes on, this covert operation becomes increasingly known to the American people, and the people really start to turn against it. And so Jolani's move was important, and the timing is important here because that's what kind of allowed him to, and the Syrian opposition, to continue to get assistance from the US and our allies. And so that's the first rebrand. In 2017, the Islamic State has largely been defeated, and so a lot of their fighters really have nowhere to turn. And so he rebrands his organization again, and this time he calls it Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or simply HTS. And the real rebrand here is about bringing the former ISIS fighters back into his fold and back into his coalition. And so, yeah, that is his history, kind of ties with the Islamic State. From then until now, he's basically, I saw this, Karen Kukowski said this on Judge Napolitano's show in This Week. He's essentially been Al-Qaeda in a suit. So, he doesn't necessarily look like Osama bin Laden sitting in a cave somewhere. He looks like he's gone to a barber. Not that he's got a clean shaven chin, but, you can see he's got he's a little bit cleaned up, and he's wearing a suit rather than military garb. And so, but he's still Al-Qaeda. He's still philosophically Al-Qaeda. He's just understood that changing the image makes him, more, I guess, that he could still get the support from Turkey, from Saudi Arabia, from the U.S.
All right, so just to simplify this a little bit, what's the guy's name again?
Jolani.
So Jolani. Let's go with Jolani. I'm probably not saying that right, but let's just go with that. Let's call him Joel. So you got this guy Joel, and he sees what happens on 9/11. He goes, I want to go fight the Americans. So he joins Al-Qaeda in Iraq. That later becomes ISIS, and he goes, you know what? I'm going to go over to Syria, claim my own territory. He rebrands, doesn't want to call himself ISIS anymore, and then the U.S. goes, oh, you're not ISIS anymore. Why don't we work with you? And so he becomes, so is he one of the original moderate rebel groups? When we were saying that there were moderate rebels, was he one of the basically Al-Qaeda guys that we were working with in Syria to overthrow Assad?
Yeah, so his fighters would join groups with various different names, and the most popular one was the Free Syrian Army. But even
you know what that sounds like? It sounds like an accounting scam where they're all the same exact thing and just coming up with new with different names, so that you and Scott Horton have to be on shows and keep saying different things, and it kind of just throws us off the scent of, let's just say they're bad guys and we're giving them money because it serves our interests in this specific instance.
No, and I think also, Robbie, it adds like almost a layer of conspiracy theory, right? Where you look like, there's that meme they got of Scott Horton where he's got the board and all the strings attached to it behind it. And you really almost have to do that because these groups, keep changing their names and their affiliations. And, particularly during the early years of the Syrian civil war, you have fighters flowing in from all over the Muslim world. You had the jihadists from Libya that the U.S. is really funneling there. And those, by the way, are the veterans. Those are the people who fought against the Americans in Iraq then went to Libya, overthrew Gaddafi, and then the U.S. helped them. This is Hillary Clinton's plan. You know, we know explicitly that they did this, that they helped these jihadists get from Libya with their weapons, with the looted weapons from Muammar Gaddafi into Syria. But then they got joined up by a lot of, Muslims from Central Asia, including Uyghurs from China. You know, their Muslim minority group that there's a lot of oppression of. And so there's all kinds of different groups. And so sometimes the U.S. would say, oh, we're giving the arms to the Free Syrian Army. And what did they do with those weapons? Well, they were either Al-Qaeda, and so they just took their weapons back to the al-Nusra front. You know, they were just wearing the Free Syrian Army robes for the day or whatever. Or they sold their weapons to Al-Qaeda, or a few times, actually, they tried to stand up to Al-Qaeda and say that, no, we want a real Syrian revolution that's about, liberty and freedom and things like that. And what happened? Al-Qaeda killed them and took their weapons.
All right, so I do have a question about, I guess, ISIS and this group of people. I remember there was a time in my life where I used to thumb through foreign affairs, and sometimes it was an interesting read, sometimes it was a boring read, and other times you're just kind of getting a direct feed on what the propaganda is. But I remember once reading an article about ISIS, and it seemed, I'm pulling from memory here, that some of the backbone of ISIS was actually just the old Iraqi Guard. After kind of the fall of the country, some of the Iraqi generals rebranded under ISIS and then started taking over territory. And while I'm sure the extremism exists, I'm not saying that it didn't exist and probably pulls more people into the mold. It seemed like the backbone was actually some of the old Iraqi Guard and kind of then grabbing up that military gear, and that the real money that ISIS was making was actually in taking over territories and then taxes. So not to say that they didn't also have an agenda of caliphate and the Sharia law or whatever. But so I guess, firstly, I'm curious to know how accurate that storyline is. And then for this guy, it's kind of like, I've heard that give me a second here. The Crusades was actually about the spice trade. And I always thought that it was an interesting thing in the Book of Eli when all of a sudden, I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but when all of a sudden a Bible pops up and the villain in that universe goes, I need that Bible because the words of the Bible is what's going to bring more people into my fold. Like, it's a good way of controlling people. So I'm curious, even in the world of terrorism, like this guy, is he looking for, hey, Assad's making billions of dollars a year because he's the oligarch that controls the entire industry? Is he looking for political power, or is he actually looking to take over Syria so that he can implement Sharia law and then hopefully have a better terrorist base? Like, what do you think his actual agenda is? And I know it's a long question, am I right at all about the old Iraqi generals?
Yeah. So I think what you're referring to there is after the U.S. takes over Iraq, we decide to dissolve Saddam's old army. And that does include some Sunnis who do go on to join Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I'm not sure how many of them actually went on, and were around 5-8 years later when the Islamic State is then rampaging back through Iraq and taking Iraqi territory. Certainly, it's important to remember that ISIS was taking a lot of Iraqi military gear. When the U.S. had built this Iraqi army back in, 2010, 2011, I guess this would have been a little later, 2012, 2013, we had built this Iraqi army and we deployed them. And they're mostly Shia, but we deployed them to the Sunni areas of Iraq. And so when ISIS comes across the Iraqi border and they're somewhat greeted by some of the Sunnis who feel that they are basically being ruled over and oppressed by the Shia, now Baghdad government of Iraq, you do have a lot of those Shia then saying, well, why are we going to defend Mosul from the Islamic State? This isn't Shia territory, and they just left their military equipment. So, the Islamic State was certainly lousy with American military equipment. And also, again, some of the veterans from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so I'm sure some of them did previously serve in Saddam's army at some point. Now, onto your other question, Robbie, I do think the answer is the latter of the scenarios you presented. Now, I think from everything I've read about Jolani, it seems that everything he has done in his, adult life has been to furthered the Al Qaeda cause, has been in coordination with the Al Qaeda leadership. And now he is saying that he's reformed some. I believe they say they allowed like women to not have to wear the full like head to toe black burqas when he ruled the Idlib province, and this is like some identifier that he's willing to liberalize. I think he is a somewhat of a pragmatist in that he was willing to compromise on some things in order to get what he ultimately wanted, which was Damascus. But now I do think we're going to see largely the imposition of Sharia law over the territory that he controls in Syria, the to some degree ethnic cleansing of minority groups in Syria, certainly chasing the Christians and the Druze and the Alawites out of the more valuable territory that the Sunnis are going to want to take over. And yeah, I think this is going to, even if Jolani himself isn't sitting there plotting the next 9/11, the central bank of Syria was looted. The Syrian armories were looted, at least those that weren't blown up by Israel. And of course, they were looted by a bunch of people who, followed Jolani's Al Qaeda message for years and years and years. And so it's, even if he personally isn't going to be involved in the plotting of the next 9/11, his government is certainly going to be like a festering wound that allows that to happen. And also, you got, whenever we're talking about this, we have to mention that there's just so much anti-American feelings in the Middle East right now because of the U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza. So, you kind of got two big things tied there. Yeah.
So in your eyes, how direct is the U.S. involvement? It was just, at some point in time, he's fighting Assad and they go, hey, this isn't our interest, and so we're arming him. Do you think that the CIA was more directly involved with this particular push? Do you think they fell for the rebrand? Or do you think they just like chaos in the region and they go, hey, we would rather have these terrorists running this territory than Assad? Like, what do you think is the actual... I guess it's a two-part question. A, was the U.S. directly involved with this? And B, why do you think that they take that strategic risk, or what is their outlook?
All right, yeah. So there's a lot that the U.S. has done to bring down bring down Bashar al-Assad. So, like, if you need me to elaborate more about, I'll try to go through this kind of quickly. In the very early days of the Syrian civil war, 2010, 2011, the U.S. starts piling the money and jihadists and the weapons into Syria. And so this really ignites and expands the Syrian civil war to a level that it would have never got to, right? Assad's rule would have never been as weakened and threatened as it was had they not done that for years and years and years. But when Trump finally takes over, he ends the CIA's Timber Sycamore program. So we stop the direct CIA assistance to the Syrian rebel factions that are linked to Al Qaeda, which, that's a good thing. At the same time, Trump starts carrying out strikes against Bashar al-Assad and also sanctioning the Syrian government. And this is intentionally to prevent Syria from ever being rebuilt. Additionally, the U.S. is allowing Israel to bomb Syria twice a week during this time, and there's nothing that the Syrian government could do about it. And so their army is just taking beating after beating and is getting weakened during this time. Additionally, the U.S. bats the Syrian Kurds, and they take about a third or a quarter of Syria, basically all the territory east of the Euphrates River. And that's where a lot of the Syrian energy resources and agricultural land is. And so all these things that we've done over the years have really undermined the Syrian government. Now, to get to the final push that happened over the past couple of weeks, we have to look at Turkey, our NATO ally, who for years has had their troops in outposts to prevent Assad and Russia and Iran from just going through and taking out Jolani and his Al-Qaeda thugs in the Idlib province. And then additionally, the Turks have been equipping them. And so even if that isn't direct American support, anything that's happening from our NATO ally is at least passive American support. But I think the more damning evidence is we now know, and this was in the Washington Post yesterday, David Ignatius said that Ukraine had sent 150 drones and 20 men to HTS, to Jolani, to help them in this offensive. And so that certainly has to be direct American support. There's nothing that the Ukrainians are doing. They're not moving their weapons and their military personnel without direct permission from the White House.
Okay, and then how did this seemingly happen so quickly? You know, to my eye, I forgot that there was a civil war in Syria. The last I remembered of it was we were trying to oust Assad. Putin basically got his back, and I guess Assad was holding on, and it was business as usual. I mostly even forgot that there was a civil war out there, and I thought if there was, Assad kind of, with his ruthless dictatorship, was handling it. And then this seemed to happen over the weekend. You know what I mean? It was almost like the way the housing market collapsed. I mean, that's like the old saying of slow and then suddenly all at once or whatever. But what actually changed that Assad seemingly had this under control and then within the course of a weekend had to flee the country?
Yeah, so we don't know everything yet. Over the next, weeks and months and probably even years, we're going to learn more and more details. Particularly, I think what the U.S. role in all this was and what the CIA's role in all this was. But I think there's a couple pretty obvious factors that we could talk about. One, two of Assad's main backers, Russia and Hezbollah, has significantly reduced their support to Syria due to their own geopolitical issues. So Russia had been far more concerned about the war in Ukraine. They've moved personnel, military equipment, and things like that out of Syria to be able to fight the war in Ukraine. And then Hezbollah was providing, I think, most of the main, or at least the main effective fighting force for the Syrian army for all these years, Robbie. And so they've taken a beating from the Israelis in southern Lebanon over the past year, but particularly over the past 2 months. And I don't think it could be discounted that, if Hezbollah had to withdraw a significant number of troops, had these trained, very well-disciplined soldiers been in Syria, then the Al-Qaeda, Jolani's forces, probably wouldn't have overrun the Syrian army as quickly as they did. Another factor is, Syria has been at war for a very long time, so I'm sure there's a lot of military fatigue among the soldiers in Syria, but particularly, Assad is an Alawite, that's a minority set in Syria, and the plurality of the population are Sunnis, and the Sunnis are, conscripted into the military. And so, my guess is that a bunch of young conscripts who get regularly bombed by Israel, their government could do nothing to defend them. Probably the army was very demoralized. And so when there was a threat facing them, their options were either to stand and fight and probably die, or throw off their uniforms and hope to blend in with the civilian population. And it seems they chose the latter. Another real advantage does seem to be the drone advantage that HTS had over the Syrian army in the latter days. And so I guess, they were able to take out Syrian Arab army positions when they were just, kind of starting to queue up and starting to put together their front lines and things like that. And again, extremely demoralizing if you can't even set up defensive lines without them being taken out. You don't even get to see the enemy. You're just being taken out by flying drones from the sky that, again, your government has no ability to shoot down. I think that played a factor. I also think we're going to come to see in time, and I don't know about this one yet, but this is my speculation, that a lot of money was handed out from HTS to local officials to military commanders, and basically said,
some of them off.
Yeah, here's $10,000, go somewhere else. Want to start your life somewhere else, go take your military equipment somewhere else, defect and join ours. There's anything to just have them not fight. And it doesn't seem that a lot of fighting happened over the past week. Certainly not any kind of direct conflict or big battles. Most of the fighting seems to have been done by Al-Qaeda's drones taking out the Syrian army.
It's so crazy. So, $10,000 can do that. It's like that's 6 months rent in America.
Yeah, well, they're talking about, I think, $400 for each soldier who laid down their arms. And so, when I'm talking about $10,000 saying a general or something.
That's less than the cost of one rifle. Like, if you just think about the idea that we could probably be just bribing soldiers as opposed to fighting them. All right, so my next question for you is, let's shelve our morality for a second here. And that, to me, there's like, I'm a pacifist. I'm a big old hippie. I think we could be getting along, and that for the most part, these wars are not helpful for humanity. But there's different levels to the inhumanity of what governments can do. So, like, for example, at the end of the war, when Hitler's sending Jews to the death camps instead of using the trains for military gear, that's just absolutely doesn't serve any strategic interest. It's just immoral. Or let's say you have a war that serves zero strategic interest, but it's like an Iraq war type thing, but Dick Cheney gets to make his money building bases. So there's no strategic interest there whatsoever, but Dick Cheney, he gets to make his money. But then you could have like a World War II, where even though I don't think this necessarily served us well in the long run, the U.S. walks away as the world reserve currency. So even though you might not agree with it, you could at least go, well, there was a strategic benefit. It was not moral. Maybe we didn't need to fight it, but there was a strategic benefit that we walked away as the world reserve currency. So this whole time I'm looking at the Ukraine war and I'm going, this thing makes zero sense whatsoever. Doesn't seem like we're getting anything out of it. We're spending a lot of money. A lot of people are dying. No benefits. From an amoral perspective, if we actually bog down Russia enough that we're able to overturn Syria, is there any strategic win here? Like, is there anything that, like, is there now that port, was that actually important? Now we have access to it. I don't know. Is there any like even strategic win here? Or is it just Israel wants more chaos in the region and to weaken Iran? Like what is the, or is it just another immoral, hey, our military industrial complex wants chaos so it can print more guns?
Yeah, I mean, the Russian base, though, what's going to happen there is still to be seen. The Russians are saying that they've made a deal with the rebels that will allow them to stay at their bases. The area that the bases are in the Alawite areas of Syria, and it's not exactly clear if the Al-Qaeda rebels will be able to take and hold all that territory. I mean, there's so much going on in Syria right now. Turkey is invading some of the Kurdish areas, and so Israel is invading taking quite a good swath of territory. And so I think it's really hard to predict what's going to happen long-term with the Russian bases. Certainly there will be people in Washington, D.C. who will cheer if Russia loses their naval base there. How much of a difference it makes for Russia geopolitically? Probably some. This is, I believe, their only base on the Mediterranean Sea. That being said, will they probably find and exert influence in other places to be able to set up a naval base? I imagine so. It's, they make it sound so permanent, like this is going to be some great victory that will plague Russia forever. I'm sure it's at least a short-term, if not a medium-term setback for the Russians, particularly if they do lose the base, but that's
and
not
why is
to
having
say
a base in the region so important? Like, unless you're playing the stupid risk game of, I don't understand. What is, yeah, that's it?
Well, and for Russia, you got to remember, this is within their, kind of general neighborhood. It's not their next door neighbor, but all the streets connect. And so if you're, Putin, who rules a very openly Christian country, a lot of their values are very openly coming from Christianity, and they have a Muslim minority population that has caused them terrorist problems in the past. Certainly having al-Jolani ruling Syria is something that would make you very anxious, and you want that, like, lingering Al-Qaeda threat to exist somewhere so close to your borders. And so I do think there's probably that more immediate concern from Russia. But other than that, Robbie, I think it is kind of just playing risk and having pieces and being able to, have their ships in the Mediterranean Sea. I think if you're looking at this amorally, again, in the halls of Washington, what they're talking about and what they're celebrating right now is what they're going to call the breaking of the Shia Crescent. And so for a long time, right, Saddam Hussein and the Iranians were at odds with each other. But when the U.S. overthrew Saddam Hussein and allowed popular vote to decide who was going to rule Iraq, the Shia took over. And so once that happened, you had Tehran, Iran, then you had Iraq, then you had Syria and Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, all shared a continuous border. And they used to say, this is a great Iranian land bridge from, Tehran to Beirut in order to prop up and to arm Hezbollah. And certainly there has been some truth to that over the past years. Logistically, it makes it a hell of a lot easier not to have to use the sea route to get their weapons to southern Lebanon. And so this, now I want to say too, I think that the whole Shia Crescent thing has become probably less important over the past year, but specifically 6 months, as Israel has been absolutely pummeling Syria in all what they consistently say are these Iranian targets and these Iranian weapon shipments that they were sending through Syria to get to southern Lebanon. And so how effective that land bridge has been in recent times, I don't know. But they're going to, that's one of their main celebrations, right? Is that Assad was an ally of Iran, and now Iran no longer has that ally in Damascus.
Okay, and then on that note, if we're going to take a second and shelve our morality once again, is Netanyahu like a total gangster who is just kicking? Like, if you look at this, try and zoom out 200 years, do you think that this ends up working out incredible for Israel, that none of their, I don't really think everyone wants to destroy Israel, and I think Israel doesn't need to be killing innocent civilians, and we could figure out a way for people to be getting along that isn't, hey, every one of my neighbors needs to die and they can't exist because otherwise that threatens my security. I don't think that needs to be reality. Netanyahu seems to be pretty invested into the storyline of everyone's coming for the Jews, it's us versus them, and we understand that the global stage might not like it, but it's tribal warfare, and we got to eliminate as many of these countries as we can so that we can continue to live here, because that's the only way that we can be secure. If you just had to zoom out and fast forward 200 years in the future, is Netanyahu kicking ass right now where this plays well for him, or what's kind of just what's your prediction in terms of, I guess, the aggressive moves that he's made over the last, 2 years in terms of displacing countries and individuals within the region?
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible that 200 years from now in Israel, it's kind of almost, they've conquered swaths of Syria, southern Lebanon, Gaza, the West Bank, maybe parts of the Sinai or something like that. I think Netanyahu has his eyes on expanding Israel's borders quite a bit. And yeah, maybe 200 years from now, Robbie, Israel looks back on it kind of like the Americans look at, back on the Native Americans, where it really sucks for them, but we're all kind of happy that we have this great country from sea to shining sea, right? And so we kind of just ignore our genocidal bad story there, and America is a really strong and prosperous country. It's not impossible that that's in line for Israel's future. I think that Israel's problem is this: Netanyahu is expanding his borders, and that involves doing things that really, really upset his neighbors. The ethnic cleansing of Gaza to expand Israel's borders there, the slow annexation of the West Bank that we're seeing, the invasion and at least some Israeli troops remaining in southern Lebanon, and now Israeli troops pushing even into the outskirts of Damascus. Again, all this could be conquered territory that one day is just drawn around Israel on the map, and nobody really discusses how Israel came to obtain that territory. I think the other possibility is eventually the American empire can no longer sustain itself, and Washington cannot exert the influence it has over the Middle East. If you look at the situation in the Middle East right now, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Sudan, Somalia are all historically weak countries. The Egyptians, Jordanians, Saudis, Emirates, Qataris are all bought and paid for by the Americans. And so with that status quo, I think Israel can continue to expand their borders, and they can continue to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. But what happens if the Americans are no longer buying off the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Jordanians? What happens when America is no longer destabilizing Iraq and Syria and Libya year after year, and a new, stronger leader emerges in one of those countries and decides that they don't like so much what the Israelis did to the Palestinians. Then I think you could see this as Netanyahu essentially sealing Israel's fate, where they are put in a position where they fight a war that they cannot win, and they no longer have Washington's backing to bail them out.
All right. And now last question on this, and then I'm going to run through some random headlines over the last couple days so you can give us some insight on it. Do you think, is this going to be any better for the people of Syria? I know that Assad was a brutal dictator, but we've also seen when other brutal dictators have fallen in the region that that people do not end up in a better position or situation. What is your expectation just for like the day-to-day life of the people of Syria? Is this the end of a civil war? And, it's going to be worse for some groups, but for like the population as a whole, this could potentially be better. What's your prediction or expectation there?
Yeah, I think Syria is going to probably be in a really bad situation in the years to come. Since the fall of Assad, Israel has bombed Syria, I think 500 plus times. The U.S. has dropped dozens of bombs. Turkey's dropped dozens of bombs. And so there's no sign that this war is going to end. But Assad, for all of his faults, being a brutal dictator and his oppression of anyone who stood up to him politically, did to some degree have some liberal policies and allowed the existence of minority communities in Syria, in something that I don't think is going to be allowed under the incoming government. And so I think, generally speaking, that the situation for Syrians is going to get worse. The one thing I will say, Robbie, is that the U.S. has maintained these sanctions on Syria that were designed and were effective in preventing the Syrian country from being rebuilt. I mean, you had children freezing to death in the middle of the Syrian winters. You had, after the major earthquake that hit southern Turkey and northern Israel, or northern Syria, the U.S. not lift sanctions, so aid couldn't get to the people, the thousands that were trapped under the rubble. And Israel actually bombed the closest airport to prevent even friendly countries from bringing aid in. And so if that kind of cruelty stops, then some people in Syria might actually end up with a little bit better living standard. If the U.S. lifts the sanctions and they could import, equipment to repair their energy infrastructure, their sewage infrastructure, they need construction equipment, steel, all these building supplies and materials that can't get into Syria right now. If because the U.S. prefers Al-Qaeda to Iran in Damascus, that we finally lift the sanctions on Syria, well, even though a lot of bad things have happened, economically the situation might get better for some people. So I could see like kind of that happening a little bit too.
All right. And now I do want to run through some random headlines, which I think will bring some more insights into the storyline. But before I do, anything you'd like to plug or anything else on the topic you think is important for people to be aware of?
Yeah, I have a brand new show, Robbie, the Kyle Lanslone Show. It's like a high production show. I actually have a producer helping me put it together, like
Nice.
somebody behind the scenes helping
go.
me run the show. It's absolutely awesome. I just put out an episode on Syria yesterday. And so if people could go to the YouTube channel, watch the episode, subscribe, I really appreciate it.
Excellent. All right. So here, first a storyline that I thought caught my eye. This was from Mish Talk. He's a blog. I read him nearly every day. He's great, but I just want to read this to you. After the lighting offensive that saw, I'm just calling him Joe. Joe's forces seize Aleppo. He issued edicts to his Sunni group ordering the protection of Christians and Shiites and demanding that his men not exact retribution. In the future Syria, we believe that diversity is our strength, not a weakness, he said. And the second I saw the word diversity is our strength, I was like, that sounds like some CIA marketing right there. I don't know if you have a different takeaway or if you think he's not going to be making good on his word of not exacting retribution.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be making good on his word. I think he's trying to get the $10 million American bounty on his head lifted. And so he's going to say the things that sound good to the people in Washington. Like emphasize, especially while Biden's in office, they're going to be emphasizing diversity. Hell, he may even like suggest that he wouldn't kill all the gay people or something like that, just to get Washington's support. But if you look at the videos of what's happening in Syria, where horrific scenes of summary executions going on. So
the terrorists have
his men are
learned-
not living up to his word, even if he's saying it.
The terrorists have somewhat learned, hey, if we're already going to be immoral terrorists, why don't we do what everyone else does and lie? Why is it that our morality is that we have to, like, he's like, look at everyone else. They're all evil, but they pretend like they're doing good. Like, why do we have to just be, we're the ones you know what I mean? So he's realizing, hey, let's just walk around and use some of these gay words. Like, we're all about diversity. And then people might send us some money and want to work with us.
Yeah. And to emphasize here too, that this is Al-Qaeda. And so they're lying to their enemy. It's not like they're lying to their friends. Like, they are betraying us because they hate us. Right. That's why they're lying. It's not like they're lying to fellow Muslims or anything like that. They're lying to their devout enemies.
Sorry, I forgot to. All right, next one. Syrian military officials are charged with war crimes as government falls. The official Jamil Hassan and Abdul Salam Muhammad ran an infamous prison in Damascus and sought to terrify, intimidate, and repress any opposition or perceived opposition to the regime, according to the indictment. I saw some horrifying footage of, I guess, people being taken out of this prison. Maybe you can give us some insight into just how brutal Assad has been to, the general population.
Yeah, I mean, it seems in Syria that the big thing was anybody who stands up to Assad politically, it didn't really matter your religion. That's not what you got thrown in jail. Just people who dissented from his political rule ended up in some pretty brutal prisons, and for years and years, and like decades, even some at a time. And so that's absolutely awful. Now, I will say, Robbie, this is a prison that's held the enemies of Bashar al-Assad. And for about a decade and a half, he's been fighting Al-Qaeda. And so while I'm sure there's a lot of political prisoners that were in that building, I think there's also an awful lot of Al-Qaeda fighters who may have been sitting and stewing in these jail cells for years and years and years. And so we have heard from Joe Biden that they're concerned about the fall of our Kurdish protectorate government in eastern Syria because there's a jail there that holds a lot of ISIS fighters. I think we should have those same concerns about these prisons as well, that, some of the people in there are actually really, really bad people. Now, the people who ran the prison are also really, really bad people. And I'm not going to shed any tears when Al-Qaeda exacts their brutal revenge on the people who ran that prison.
On that note, what is the story with the Kurds? I mostly only hear about them through Dave when they pop up the propaganda of, hey, we got to protect the Kurds. Can you give us the short on the Kurds and why we occasionally hear about them?
Yeah, so the Kurds are presented as the moderates of the Muslim world to the American people. And after, again, the CIA was backing Al-Qaeda, when that became transparent to the American people, our policy in Syria shifted to having the Pentagon back the Syrian Kurds. Now, the Syrian Kurds are not, these great moderates, that they are presented to be. In fact, the YPG, the Syrian Kurds, are an offshoot of the Kurdish PKK, the Turkish Kurds, and that's labeled as an international terrorist group by the United States of America. And so, the hands aren't clean there. They have really lorded their rule over the local Arab population and the Yazidis, and they conscript as young as the age of 15, including little girls. 15-year-old girls have reportedly been conscripted by the Syrian Kurds. And so these are presented as kind of our moderate good allies in the Middle East. They're just another group of fighters. They're just another group of people who have their own eyes and their own designs on having, I think, at least an autonomous area, if not a full-on Kurdish state that exists somewhere in eastern Syria, northern Iraq, maybe even, I guess that's western and northern Iran, southern Turkey, these, areas that the Kurds live in. Unfortunately, the way that the Middle East was carved up post World War I and II, the Kurds end up with no state of their own, and they're a minority group in all these different countries. And so, they tend to have a little bit of autonomy, and they get backed by the U.S. Now, typically, that backing from the U.S. only exists as long as it's politically convenient. And so when the Kurds were doing really well against the Islamic State in 2015, 2016, 2017, the US actually started to pull back on the support a little bit because it was really upsetting Turkey, who's our NATO ally. And in the pecking world order, you have Israel and Ukraine up on top, but then you have the rest of the NATO countries in the middle, and that comes before any of these little proxy groups in the Middle East. And so when it comes to if we're going to upset Turkey or if we're going to upset the Kurds are the ones that are going to get screwed.
All right, next one is, this was from Zero Hedge. IDF tanks reach just 25 kilometers from Damascus as Netanyahu declares Golan is ours forever. So it does appear as if Netanyahu is engaging in some land grabs and then also weakening Syria because I guess there's no one defending some of where the supply bases are for, which I guess if this is actually an Al-Qaeda group, maybe that's actually in our strategic interest to leave them with as little of a military as possible. But I'll let you take over to kind of loop us in on what Netanyahu is doing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to the extent that Netanyahu is bombing the Agile arms depots that are now controlled by Al-Qaeda, this isn't, that's not the worst thing that happens in the Middle East. I'm not for any of these wars, Robbie, but that's not the one I'm going to be complaining about. Now, they keep saying that they're hitting Syrian chemical weapon sites, which the International Watchdog on Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, affirmed in 2015 and 16 had been disposed of. And so I'm not exactly sure what sites are actually being hit here.
That sounds dangerous to me. If you missile strike a depot that's holding chemical weapons, are you for sure demolishing all the chemical weapons? Or I guess maybe they might really know the math on how much firepower is needed so that you're not just releasing chemical weapons, but it seems to me like that would be a possibility of if you're striking chemical weapons plants.
I certainly wouldn't want to live in the neighborhood where that was happening. I mean, I think it's probably a danger to the local population, something I don't think Netanyahu is probably all too concerned about at this point. And so, yeah, I guess I really wonder what Israel's hitting to the extent that they're hitting Al-Qaeda arms depots. I guess I don't care all that much.
Well, I guess at this
point, the land grab
is
a bigger issue. You know what I mean? Like taking the Syrian territory that they're probably never going to get back. And if you look at where Israel is taking Syrian territory, it seems to be moving northward to try to cut off southern Lebanon from Syria. And so who knows how much this actually has to do with taking territory in Lebanon as well.
And then on that note, so this was from Gronk. Or Grok, I don't know, however it's pronounced, the Twitter thing. Israel operations Bashan Arrow strikes 320-plus Syrian targets. In the wake of the fall of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, Israel has launched a significant military operation named Operation Bashan Arrow, targeting over 300 strategic locations in Syria. This operation includes strikes on Syrian weapon depots, naval facilities, and Air Force assets, aimed at preventing the transfer of arms to Hezbollah and ensuring these capabilities do not fall in the hands of potential jihadist groups. The Israeli military action was described by IDF as a necessary measure to counter regional threats.
Yeah, I think the number of strikes is up over close to at least 500 now, but as I said, when we find out what they're hitting, it may be a lot more, kind of civilian targets, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and things like that to permanently weaken the Syrian state.
All right. And then last one, this is on a different topic. This is, it seems that even though Biden is on the way out, he's trying to make sure that some of his initiatives are still funded. So he's trying to pass off money to some of the computer chip manufacturers, trying to make sure that some of the green energy scam people still get their paychecks. And then he's trying to funnel as much money as he can to the Ukraine on the way out. So the most recent one is U.S. transfers $20 billion loan to Ukraine backed by Russian assets. And so I was confused by this because there was a long-standing storyline of seizing Russian assets because, we're not at war, but we are at war with them, and then handing them to Ukraine, and then people saying that sounds like a disaster because, we're already isolating people from our financial system, and we need people to use our financial system in order to spread around our inflation. And so for us to steal people's reserves, less people might, be lending money to us or leaving money in places where we can seize it from them. Is this actually a win? I was confused by this one because it sounded like they weren't actually doing that. But this seemed like maybe it was some financial scam to essentially accomplish the same thing. So this just came out today. You might not even be familiar with it, but it caught my headline. I thought maybe you could give us some clarification if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, so I could say a lot on this. This is all a part of a Western policy that's existed for like the past year and a half, as it's become increasingly obvious that Trump was going to win the election or return to the White House, to do what they call Trump-proof the war in Ukraine. They want to make it so that Trump cannot end the war in Ukraine. And I actually think that this is their best kind of weapon, the best arrow in their sling to do so. And so the idea here is that what Trump has said that he was going to do, and he hasn't laid out his whole plan on how he plans to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, which of course is completely ridiculous. But whatever plan he has to end the war, he has made it clear that what he is going to do is to tell Ukraine that, listen, if you want to keep getting any American support whatsoever, you have to sit down at the negotiating table with Vladimir Putin. And so the U.S. is pushing $7 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine right now, and then giving this additional $20 billion, which actually is not $20 billion, it's $50 billion, because our European allies are kicking in another $30 billion. So it's $50 billion total. And the idea is if that Zelensky is sitting on this massive pile of money and weapons, that he's not going to give in to Trump's pressure to negotiate with the Russians. Now, I think this $50 billion is particularly good at Trump-proofing the war in Ukraine, because if you look at the first Trump administration, one of the things he really couldn't resist doing is selling weapons to everywhere in the world. Saudi Arabia, whoever it was, he was willing to. He's closing deals. And so if Zelensky has $50 billion and shows up to, the White House with a $50 billion check in hand and says, I'm going to spend this on American weapons, is Trump going to say, we don't want your money, we want you to negotiate an end to the war? Or is he going to get a big old grin on his face and start talking about how he's the greatest deal maker and he made $50 billion in weapons? Now, another thing you're talking about there is kind of the logistics of this. And so the West has between 200 and 300 million in frozen Russian funds. And so Russia wants that money back, of course, and they think that they're going to get that money back one day. And initially, as you said, they were talking about just using that money to buy weapons for Ukraine. But this is actually a little bit different what they're going to do, because they're going to say, we're going to take out a loan. The Americans are taking out a loan. They're giving the money to the Ukrainians, and they're saying that the collateral for that loan is the frozen Russian assets, and they're planning to pay that off with the interest from the frozen Russian assets. So honestly, Robbie, you probably understand the finances of this a little bit better than I would. I have no idea how long it would take to pay off a $50 billion loan using the interest off of $200 billion, but it seems like a long time to me. And the Russians are going to expect interest on their $200 billion in frozen assets. And so it's not like they're just going to let the Americans run off with all that extra money. And so this really sets up a perpetual problem where the West is eventually going to have to take their own taxpayer money and give that to the Russians to eventually unwind and end this economic war going on between the two sides. And so this is setting up, I think, a decade long, if not longer, kind of Cold War economic war between the U.S. and Russia, as Russia is demanding back their billions of dollars in assets that the U.S. loaned to Ukraine. And then I'm sure we're going to forgive that money, by the way, because the Ukrainians will never be able to pay it back. And likely the Russian assets will be unfrozen before those loans are fully repaid.
There you go. Mr. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on. This was a dense an episode. Once again, why don't you plug antiwar.com and where people can find your podcast?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Robbie. It's always a great time to be on with you. Congratulations on your stand-up special. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
One of the funniest things I've ever seen recorded in a garage. And then you can find my work at antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute. And then I host one show, Conflicts of Interest, and the brand new show, The Kyle Anslone Show.
That rules. And if you could just on Twitter message me the link, I'll make sure to include it in the episode description.
Thanks, Robbie.
All right, that is our episode. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. That was some dense information. Go eat second lunch, absorb it all. And as I said in the episode description, I also have 2 shows coming up. One in San Antonio, Texas, and the other one out in New Jersey. I hope to see you there. Enjoy your day. Back probably next week, Wednesday, with another episode. Have a good one.